Hi. Just talking to somebody on YouTube about sleep apnea, and sleep apnea is a really serious health issue, right? And what it is it's disordered breathing while you're asleep. There's something going wrong. Why you can't breathe normal? Why you're stopping breathing at night? And sleep is critical. Sleep is as important as breathing, or like it's vital to life, right? I had 3 hours of sleep last night. I'm suffering like a dog. And um my sleep apnea and my sleep issues were, well, I say they were misdiagnosed for 40 years, but in truth, my sleep issues were probably misdiagnosed my entire life. And I mean, I'd never heard of sleep apnea before, and I started fighting for help with my sleep when I was 15 years old. And so from the time I started fighting for help until I finally got help, it was 40 years. And it it took 40 years not for them to diagnose me, but for me to diagnose me. And when I'd never heard of sleep apnea. Sleep apnea is when you're stopping breathing at night. Like, I have complex sleep issues, right? That's what it turned out to be. And they were unable to diagnose any of it. In the end, I diagnosed all of it. And I'm still trying to get help, and I'm still in crisis. And um so sleep apnea is when you're stopping breathing. Either it's a mechanical issue, like you've got a narrow airway, or your tongue is falling back. And when you fall asleep, everything gets so lax, so loose, that your throat is closing, and you stop breathing over and over again. That is obstructive sleep apnea. And central sleep apnea is when your brain stem, the part there's a part in your brain stem that controls your breathing. Central apnea is when your brain is literally not signaling your diaphragm and body to breathe. You're not being prompted to take that next breath. So central apnea is when you're stopping breathing from the chest and the brain. The breaths just aren't coming. And just for information's sake, respiratory depression is when your breathing is depressed, and that takes place in the brain as well. Like, if you have, let's say, respiratory depression from doctors overprescribing you medications, or respiratory depression from drinking heavily every night, or doing street drugs or whatever. Respiratory depression is in the happening in the same part of the brain where central sleep apnea occurs. It impairs your drive to breathe. And I also have an impaired drive to breathe. And I wouldn't, I've had a few central apneas here and there. I wouldn't tell people that I have central apnea, but they did. A few centrals showed up on my sleep study. But I'd never heard of sleep apnea in my life, and we should be educating people. And there was, I'd been really fighting to get help with sleep issues, complex sleep issues. And I started saying to my doctors, I can't breathe in bed. My body doesn't want to breathe. There's something bad happening to me when I'm asleep. There's something bad happening to me. I'd never heard of sleep apnea. This one doctor of mine, former doctor, deliberately withheld the information from me that we have an in-hospital sleep lab here, because she knew that if I found out, she was so sure that I did not have sleep apnea. I was young and thin and in great shape. She was so sure that I didn't have sleep apnea that she deliberately withheld that information from me. And I know that for a fact. And so this just went on and on. They thought it was anxiety. They thought it was PTSD. I knew that I was being misdiagnosed. This is why we need to educate people what sleep apnea actually is, so they can fight harder, so they can know that these sleep labs exist or at-home studies exist, and to get what you need sooner and to fight for your life sooner. And this went on, and healthcare providers can create a narrative in your healthcare records that, you have anxiety and you think, quote unquote, that you're not sleeping at night and blah, blah, blah. And as you continue to fight for help, these other healthcare providers see these notes in your records, in your medical records, that you're delusional, or you think you have, severe insomnia. You think something's happening to you when you're asleep. And other doctors and providers are negatively influenced against you. And what happens when they're wrong? Which happened, this went on and on for years and years. And what happens when they're wrong is you end up literally being tortured, and you're fighting and pushing for help. What you're actually, unbeknownst to you, you're fighting against this false narrative that exists in your medical records, and you don't know that it's there. Because most people here in Canada aren't asking for copies of all their records and reports from all these doctors that you're seeing, right? Because you just assume that everything's, being done correctly and everything's on the up and up, and you don't think that there's going to be these comments, she has a sleep perception problem, right? Which, we're getting into people delusional that you're delusional. Well, what happens when you're not delusional and they're actually wrong? So you've literally got medical providers delusional that you're delusional. So when I finally got diagnosed with sleep apnea, and they didn't believe me even when I was in medical crisis, when I finally got diagnosed, severe sleep apnea, stopping breathing nonstop, my oxygen was going down to 70, and I was stopping breathing at times as long as a minute and a third at a time. So, like, how long is that? 80 seconds at a time? Hold your breath for 80 seconds and see what that's like. And now, let's say, do that 60 times an hour. Hold your breath for 45 seconds and a minute and 20 seconds and 30 seconds, and do that nonstop every hour, and you're fighting for your life. So I was literally fighting for my life, and even at that time, they didn't believe me. And yes, medical providers can be delusional that you're delusional. But here's the thing. Never in any of this were we having the conversation of why you have apnea, and let's work to try to get you off of CPAP treatment, right? The positive airway, you put a mask on your face, and the mask is hooked up to a hose with a machine that has, air pressure, it's pressurized air blowing into your throat, your nose all night, and each time you stop breathing, the pressurized air gently forces your airway to open, or it forces you to take a breath because the pressure builds and you take a breath. And so each time you stop breathing, it opens your airway, or maybe it prevents you from, well, the hope is that it completely stops you from having apneas. And you can, that also with that machine, you can see your statistics. Like you can connect to an app that will show you, okay, well, you were having 3 apneas last night, 3 apneas per hour, or 20 apneas per hour, or whatever. But the conversation that's never taking place is there ought to, your why you have apnea should be identified, and there should be a plan of hopefully trying to get you off of it. Because what nobody tells you also is long-term CPAP treatment can adversely, they don't want to tell you this because this is enough to scare the heck out of anybody. Long-term sleep, but it's like how some people don't want informed consent. Some people want to know everything. Some people don't want to know everything medically because it scares the life out of them, right? It scares them. But most people don't know this, but long-term CPAP treatment can cause central apnea. Long-term CPAP treatment for obstructive apnea, your throat closing, can cause a lack of drive to breathe in the brain. That is, I don't know if they consider it rare. That's a potential adverse side effect of long-term CPAP treatment. And that should scare people. And I'm not trying to scare people, but it scares me because I already have a lack of drive to breathe. And so it kind of blew me away that there hasn't been, honest, transparent conversations with these doctors. They don't want to talk about it. Like, no one wanted to talk. Why do you have apnea? Like, what does the future look like? And like, so anyways, the hope should be to try to get you off of CPAP. And also the hope is that you're using CPAP and it's helping you, and you're sleeping better and you're healthier for it, which never happened in my case. CPAP stopped the apneas. It kept me breathing. I believe I was in respiratory failure when I finally got diagnosed, so it was keeping me breathing at night. But it was also causing severe sinus pain, really hurting my trigeminal nerves. It took me years to realize that it was moving my jaw back. I have a recessed jaw, which has never been diagnosed, which I finally just figured it out. And it took me years to figure out, because I'm so sleep deprived, that all the CPAP masks push my jaw back further. So they literally make my narrow airway even worse. All the CPAP masks. So the whole time I wore CPAP for 7 years. The whole time I wore it, I was in crisis. I'll do another quick video because I can only make 15-minute videos.